What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you my official preview and my official prediction on the college football playoff quarterfinal matchup between the number 7 seeded Notre Dame Fighting Irish and the number 2 seeded Georgia Bulldogs. Going to give you my official prediction on this game and give you a full preview of this matchup here as well, coming up for the quarterfinals of the college football playoff. Yesterday I did Ohio State and Oregon. If you had not seen that video, be sure to go back and check it out. And of course, this matchup will take place at the All-State Sugar Bowl. So let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to start with stats for both of these teams, and then at the end of the video, I'll give you my official prediction of how I think the game's going to go down. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We'll start with stats here for both of these teams, starting with Notre Dame. You look at the points per game, this team is averaging 38.8 points per game on the season, so that's a very good number. Notre Dame didn't score in the 30s this past weekend, but we've seen Notre Dame's offense all year long be explosive on the offensive side of the football, and mostly the scoring really comes from their running game. We'll get to the rushing yards per game in just a moment, but offensively and total yards per game all year long, Notre Dame averaging 419.2 yards of offense and yards per game. So, yeah, this is a really explosive Notre Dame offense. They can score some points. I mean, they're not an explosive offense in the country, I should say. Definitely not in the top 5, but this is still a Notre Dame team that we know they can score on the offensive side of the football each in and every single out. Passing yards per game, it's not really that high. It's kind of a big weakness for Notre Dame, but this is more of a running attack team. But you look at the passing yards per game, this team averaging 196.8 yards passing in the passing game. You look at Riley Leonard's numbers on the season, he's got 2,293 yards of passing, 17 touchdown passes, and then 6 interceptions. So he has been taking care of the football pretty well, even though he doesn't really throw the football that much like he did back at Duke for the last couple years. But coming into Notre Dame, he hasn't really thrown the football that much, I would say. But he is also more of a runner. You know, that, like I said, this is more of a running attack team that Notre Dame has. And then you look at the rushing yards per game. This is the strength of the Notre Dame offense. This team averaging 222.4 yards of rushing on the ground. So, yeah, this is a Notre Dame team on the offensive side of the football that can run the football really well. This is the strength of the Notre Dame offense. Looking at the defensive plays, looking at the defensive side of the football, I should say, in passing yards allowed in the secondary, Notre Dame giving up 162.3 yards of passing allowed. So against the pass, that's not a bad number there. You know, you look out online and everything in the rankings, I think this is like the 4th best secondary in the country. So yeah, Notre Dame's secondary might be the strength of this defensive team. And then you look at the rushing yards allowed. This team is giving up 133 yards of rushing allowed per game. So that's not a bad number either. Overall, on both sides of the football, they're just overall pretty solid, but they're definitely more strong on the defensive side of the football. You look at the offense and defensive rankings, 41st on offense. So like I said, not an explosive offense, but this is still a Notre Dame team that can score on the offensive side of the football, especially with their running game, because that's the strength of this team on the offensive side of the football. And then on the defensive side of the football, in the rankings, they're 8th on defense. So they're top 10 on the defense. That's no surprise there. With Marcus Freeman's defensive background, they're always usually ranked in the top 10, it seems like, every single year. Ever since Marcus Freeman got here, this Notre Dame defense has been really, really good and pretty dominant. Moving on to the Georgia Bulldogs, this team in points per game averaging 33.2 points per game. So just over that 30-point mark, but, you know, this is a Georgia offense that has been up and down all season long. You know, they've looked good at times and then, of course, looked bad at times. In total yards per game, though, it's really close to Notre Dame's average in offensive yards per game, 413.8 yards of offense this year on the offensive side of the football. So I think both offenses are actually pretty even. In passing yards, though, per game, Georgia has a big advantage there. They're averaging 284.6 yards of passing. Carson Beck, of course, not playing in this game. He is out for the rest of the season. So that's a bit of a question mark here for Georgia's passing game. They got Stockton, the backup quarterback. We don't really know much about him. We saw that him in the SEC championship. He came in there and played pretty well for them, but we'll see how he does in like a full-time game. So that's definitely, again, a question mark there for Georgia going into this matchup against Notre Dame. Carson Beck being out for the rest of the year. In rushing yards per game, I think this is the weakness here of Georgia's offense, and that is the running game. They're only averaging 129.2 yards of rushing on the ground, so that is not a very high number compared to Notre Dame's. Notre Dame much more stronger in the running game. But yeah, they got some pretty good running backs. Trevor Etienne is the go-to guy for them, but they also got Nick Fraser. He is the leading rusher on this team, 634 yards on the season, 129 carries, and then 8 rushing touchdowns. So yeah, Nick Fraser is the running back that you can rely on, but they also got Trevor Etienne, who has looked good at times and then also bad at times, and then also he's been kind of unhealthy and then also sometimes pretty healthy there on the running back position. And then on the defensive side of the football and passing yards allowed per game, boy, it's pretty high for Georgia, 208.7 yards allowed in the passing game. So yeah, that's not really good news there for the secondary for Georgia. But in rushing yards allowed per game, this team gives up 128.7 yards of rushing allowed. And Notre Dame's got a pretty good running game, so Georgia's definitely going to have to stop the running game of Notre Dame. And then you look at offensively and defensively in the rankings for Georgia. Again, it's not really as explosive on the offensive side of the football as it was last year, 45th on offense. I mean, they can score, but, we've seen all year long Georgia's offense really struggle at times, and then it looks good at some times as well. But you look at the defensive ranking, that's really a big weakness as well. 36 on defense. We know that Georgia's going to have a pretty good defense every year, but this is not the same type of defense that we saw from like a couple years ago and then also 3 years ago when they won that national championship. So you look at these stat comparisons here, I think offensively both teams are pretty even, but the passing yard advantage definitely goes in favor of Georgia. But Carson Beck again is out for the remainder of the season, so that might be a big weakness here coming in the passing game for Georgia. Coming into this game next week, and then the running game definitely goes in favor of Notre Dame. I would say Notre Dame probably has a better defense than Georgia, even though Georgia's got a lot of talent on that defensive side of the football, but I think overall stats are pretty even. So let's now get into a full preview of this college football playoff quarterfinal matchup. This game's going to be held on New Year's Day, so it's next Wednesday at 8:45 Eastern Time, so a late night kickoff on ESPN. Spread going in favor of Georgia by 2 here in this one, which really doesn't surprise me a little bit here because Georgia is the higher seed. And also Notre Dame has played a pretty easy schedule this year, and the over and under is at 43.5. So I'm not really shocked that the over and under is at 43.5. Not expecting a lot of points to be scored here in this game. You look at Notre Dame, they're coming off that win against Indiana in the round 1 college football playoff matchup back on December the 20th. Notre Dame's running game was pretty impressive in that game. The passing game was also there for them, and they overall were just a better team. Indiana, we knew that they were not on the level of Notre Dame's team and everything as well. So Notre Dame has a little bit of momentum coming into this game, and Georgia might have a disadvantage because Georgia, hasn't played a game in a while. That's really the big question mark here for Georgia. And then also the biggest question mark is definitely Carson Beck being out in this game. And he got Stockton, a backup quarterback that hasn't played, a lot of football. So that's definitely going to be a little bit of a disadvantage here for Georgia. But Georgia definitely has talent. There's no question about it. Kirby Smart in some of these big games. Georgia in a couple of games this year in big games. Against Texas in both the regular season and SEC championship, they came in there and stepped up in those big games, and they also did that against Tennessee. They didn't really do that against Ole Miss and Alabama, but again, this is a Georgia team that's been up and down all season long. Again, they've looked like a really good team, and then of course like a bad team sometimes or another. But yeah, I think this is going to be a competitive game. I think it will definitely be a game that probably goes either way. Again, it really comes down to the quarterback position, in my opinion, for Georgia, and it also comes down to the running game for Georgia as well, and the offensive side of the football. And for Notre Dame, I think it's also going to come down to the running game and passing game for the Fighting Irish. So that's what I think, it looks like here for the preview. But looking at the matchup predictor does favor Notre Dame. They give them about a 53.8% chance of beating Georgia here and also pulling off the upset. That's a very high percentage in my opinion. And then you look at Georgia here, the FBI gives Georgia a 46.2% chance of winning and also surviving and going on to the semifinals. So, yeah, the FBI does favor Notre Dame, but the spread going in favor of Georgia, which doesn't really surprise me that much. But I thought Georgia kind of would be an underdog here because Carson Beck is not playing, so that might be a disadvantage here for Georgia. But let's now take a look at both teams' previous games from 2024. Starting with Notre Dame, they come in with a record of 12-1. Again, they haven't lost a game ever since like week number 2. First off, they defeated Florida State back on November 9th, 52-3, so a big win there. Defeated Virginia 35-14 on November 16th. Took care of business against Army 49-14 on November 23rd. And then in rivalry weekend, they defeated USC on the road, 49-35 in rivalry weekend on November 30th. They had a couple of pick sixes in that game, and that kind of, won them the game from there. So they won by 3 touchdowns in that game, or actually a couple of touchdowns, I should say. And then their last game, of course, came in the round 1 college football playoff matchup against Indiana on December the 20th. Of course, that game just this past Friday, they won that game 27-17. I think basically just because of home field advantage, Notre Dame was able to win this game. And then also, again, the running game was just too much for Indiana's defensive line. And then also the defense of Notre Dame really stepped up in this game as well. So that's a look at Notre Dame's game comparisons here to Georgia. Let's now move on to Georgia here. They come in with a record of 11-2. They lost to Ole Miss here first off 28-10 on November 9th. In my opinion, that was probably the worst game that Georgia played all year long, in my opinion. Yeah, that was a really tough game. They could not really match up with those receivers for the Rebels, but they did bounce back against Tennessee, had a pretty good win against the Volunteers, 31-17. I thought the offense was definitely a lot better in that game compared to some of the other games that they played all year long. Defeated UMass 59-21 on November 23rd. But how about this one? Defeated rival Georgia Tech 44-42 in 8 overtimes. That was a great game there and a really good finish to that game as well. And then in the SEC Championship back on December 7th, this was the last game Georgia played. They won this game 22-19 in the rematch from the regular season. Remember, they defeated the Longhorns 30-15 in that first matchup. Then they defeated Texas here 22-19 in overtime again. So they've had back-to-back overtime games. Could that happen for the third consecutive time in a row? It could be possible because, both teams I think are pretty even on the defensive side of the football, but these are the previous game comparisons here between these two teams. Let's now get into my official prediction here for the college football playoff quarterfinal matchup. Again, Notre Dame taking on Georgia, and again, this game will take place in the All-State Sugar Bowl, so I think it's going to be in Atlanta, so it might be kind of like a home game for Georgia. There might be a little bit more Georgia fans there, but I think Notre Dame fans will show up here as well. And it's at 8:45 Eastern Time. Again, Georgia favored by 2 in this one, and the over-under at 43.5. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of points in this game. I think Georgia's offense is going to really struggle here to get past this Notre Dame defensive line. And I got to tell you, with Carson Beck being out for the rest of the year, Georgia has a lot of pressure here in this game. Just like Oregon, they have a lot of pressure going in against Ohio State because of a rematch. And they also haven't played a game since like December the 7th. And Georgia's kind of the same way. They have not played a game since December the 7th. And then also Stockton, the backup quarterback, hasn't had a lot of time as a quarterback, in a game. And he hasn't played a full game either. So I think this game is definitely, going to go either way here. But again, with Carson Beck being out for the rest of the year and Georgia, the way they've been up and down all season long, I think Notre Dame, running the football is going to be the difference here. And I also think Notre Dame can force turnovers on the quarterback for Georgia. And they also will make a difference at running the football with Riley Leonard. And if you go back to Kirby Smart's days when he was a defensive coordinator at Alabama, usually those running quarterbacks do give Georgia and Alabama's defenses trouble. So I think that's what's going to happen here. I think Notre Dame pulls off the upset here. They win this one 20-17 over Georgia, and they upset them in the quarterfinals here at the All-State Sugar Bowl. And I know you're thinking this is a bad prediction, but I don't really feel confident with it. I just really have that gut feeling without Carson Beck at quarterback, and then also Georgia being so up and down all season long, and then also not playing a game for a while. I just have that gut feeling that Notre Dame's going to win it. So Notre Dame, I got them winning this one 20-17. That is my official prediction here on the college football playoff quarterfinal matchup between Notre Dame and Georgia. And again, my pick is Notre Dame to pull off the upset 20-17. Do you guys agree or disagree? Let me go down in the comments below and give me your prediction down in the comments below on this game as well. Thanks Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.